Robert Maginnis, welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. I wanted to get you on after I saw your interview with Greg Hunter of USA Watchdog. That's an absolutely amazing radio show. The fact that it got the boot off YouTube, well, not can't really post on YouTube anymore because of the stuff he talks about, makes it a worthwhile show for everyone to listen to. And your interview is definitely eye-popping in many different ways. Just a couple of things I want to point out for my listeners. As many of you, actually, I don't know if any of you know, I haven't uploaded a video in several weeks, even though I've done a couple of interviews since my one with Neil Gore at the very end of at the end of June. But this show is now pay-per-view for the last 40% of the show. 60% will be free. The last 40% you're going to have to subscribe on Patreon to be able to listen to it. Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis has advised me to do that, as well as many others. It's about time for many of us in this time of great challenge to not be ashamed of monetizing our great work. And so that this will be up after I upload the other two interviews that I have done. I owe those people an upload before you because I interviewed them before I interviewed you. So that will be on YouTube, and also Cost.tv. The free part of the interviews will be on Cost.tv, and I encourage people, please listen to that instead of YouTube. Only listen on YouTube for 15 seconds max, 15 seconds, yeah, max, just for the sake of giving me a view credit. And then the link in to the Cost.tv interview will be in the YouTube video description. Please watch on the Cost.tv because that's a blockchain monetization channel. I can make some money if people listen to my shows on that rather than YouTube. YouTube also hasn't given me the okay on the ad monetization yet. That was about 3 weeks ago, and I wanted that, and they still haven't given me that. And I don't know if they ever will, considering my show talks about a lot of sensitive stuff that certain powers that be, or should not be, I say, don't want to hear. But I babbled long enough. Robert Maginnis, this is your chance to have some glory on this show. Let's hope the thunderstorms that are going through my area don't cause a power outage. If you can't hear me all of a sudden, you can assume that happened, and well, we'll just maybe have to do it another day if that does. But I've asked the angels and guides to make sure that doesn't. Let the angels be with us. And you, I'd like you to introduce yourself for those that haven't heard about you from a primary source perspective regarding your work, who you are, what you do that causes you to do the research you do and the stuff that you do. And then we'll get into some nitty-gritty questions after that. I don't have Alex Jones-itis. I will not interrupt my guests. I will put myself on mute and shut up and let you do all the talking. So you've got the floor, Robert Maginnis. Please introduce yourself from a primary source perspective. Your life story, please.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I went to West Point, graduated, spent 20 years active duty in the Army, 4 infantry divisions. I'm an airborne ranger. Went to the Naval Postgraduate School, Command General Staff College, Army War College Strategy course, a few other courses in between. I retired from the Army here at the Pentagon. I'm in Washington, D.C., by the way. I went from there to work at the Family Research Council, became the vice president for policy. So I did all the social policies in Washington. Subsequently returned to the Pentagon. I was a Fox News analyst as well. I've written 8 books, over 1,000 published articles. I continue to work at the Pentagon as a contractor and have for some time, and I continue even today. So that's the thumbnail sketch of my background.
Thank you. Now, the title of your Greg Hunter USA Watchdog interview, Communist Takeover of America in Progress. Now, when I see that, a few things come to mind. All the brainwashed leftists who dare call themselves liberals, they are not liberals. If you want to know what a true liberal is, you have to look at what Thomas Jefferson, the founding father, was like. That's what liberalism is supposed to be. These brainwashed leftists don't know squat about how to fight for freedom and liberty and be a true liberal. And they have, they could very well be living a lie. There are some sources out there, Benjamin Fulford, cough, cough, and such, who say that their distinguished leader George Soros has actually been dead for a while, and they're just living a lie and following the work of a dead man who really doesn't care a damn about us and wants to do a communist takeover under the guise of philanthropy. I have heard from some sources that America will be, and for all intents and purposes may very well be, currently in a civil war, which may transform into an American Revolution. And later in this interview, I'll get into what I mean by transform into an American Revolution, the next American Revolution. But when you say communist takeover America in progress, What exactly are you talking about? Please tell us everything you can about this, because people need to hear this.
Well, you mentioned Civil War and revolution. I believe that much like the Chinese had a cultural revolution in 1968 to 74, yeah, that America is going through a revolution today. And there are at least 7 very specific co-conspirators out there that are using all their powers and influence to push us into this revolution and into a total, change of our culture as well as our government and so forth. Now, I detail in chapters in Give Me Liberty, Not Marxism, the Democratic Party as a co-conspirator, the Communist Chinese regime and all their tenets as a co-conspirator, certainly the public education establishment going back to the time of John Dewey in the 30s all the way to the present. Certainly the mainstream media, which was long ago corrupted by the likes of Marxists that came over thanks to the Ford Foundation and John Dewey's invitation in about 1935. And they planted a variety of these characters that were Marxist, Jewish for the most part, because they were fleeing the Nazis in Germany at the time. And so what did we do? We put them in our best institutions. We put them out in Hollywood. And of course, they began to exercise their ideological agenda. And they don't make any pretense. The quotes are in Give Me Liberty, Not Marxism. And then, of course, we have a host of others, secret societies, which I define in there, outline exactly what they do. As a Christian, I believe that Satan and his army of demons are very real, and the things that they do are very much aligned with the other co-conspirators. And then, of course, we have the ground troops, the Antifas, the Black Lives Matter. They're all have deep histories in Marxism. And so when I argue that this is a Marxist revolution of sorts, it's because their defining ideology traces back to Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto, Das Kapital, and many of the other writings that really have their roots in the French Revolution, where true communism, got its start, arguably. And then, of course, it really began to fester at the 1917 revolution with the Lenin and the overthrow of the Tsar. And then, of course, it came to this country initially through immigrants from that part of the world, but they infiltrated a lot of our trade unions, a lot of our unions in the country. And then, of course, it blossomed from there. In the 40s and the 50s, it got to the point we had Congress was holding a host of un-American activity hearings that recognized the influence within FDR's government as well as within Hollywood and the news media, and by and large in a lot of trade unions, that we had a true Marxist influence that was having a disproportionate influence against the very founding principles and values of this country. So that's sort of the background. There's obviously in a 500-word book, I can only go through so much in a couple of minutes.
Right. And regarding these liberal, they're liberal, joke of a liberal leftist groups, run into them a few times. I have when I've gone down to Philadelphia in the Independence Hall area with some of my fellow Patriot community members back in the day. Haven't been able to do it for quite a while because of the pandemic, among other reasons. But it seemed like very often there was some sort of a leftist group trying to counter protest my patriot community folks, who you would think, well, some would say my patriot community folks, they're conservative right, but not so much so. Like I said, liberalism is like what Thomas Jefferson is supposed to be, and that's the kind of so you can call us patriot community folks liberals as well if we really know the true meaning of what the word is supposed to mean. And I can't help but wonder if I'm going to run into those joke of a leftist again when I go down there on August 5th for Robert David Steele's national tour. That's when he's going to be stopping by in Philadelphia. And So I plan to go down there, and I'm sure there's going to be some a little commotion started by some possible infiltrators and such. Out of curiosity, have you been following Robert David Steele's tour and heard anything about how things are going with that? And has he run into any problems? Because I haven't really followed it so much at this point. I just know of it and know that I'm supposed to be in Philly for that on the 5th of August.
Yeah, not really. Yeah, I'm aware, but no details.
Okay. Um, Now, this idea that America could potentially go through some big changes in the upcoming future. Now, you said you're a Christian. I'm spiritual. I'm not religious, but I am spiritual, and I am also a believer in astrology. And I don't think it's an accident that right before the American Revolution started, there was a solar eclipse that crisscrossed the country that was very similar to the solar eclipse that crisscrossed the country in August 2017. I tried to see that eclipse in Charleston, South Carolina, but I didn't because of clouds that spoiled it. But then it didn't take me long to realize that I shouldn't be upset about that because that eclipse is not the important one. The important eclipse, the big enchilada one, is going to be April 8th, 2024, which is going to crisscross America, is sort of in the opposite way of the one in 2017. And Carbondale, Illinois is the crisscross point of that eclipse and the one that happened in 2017, which is where I plan to go. And I can only imagine that the angels and guides are going to let the clouds be clear in the crisscross point, Carbondale, that day. So I'm finally going to be able to see an eclipse with open eyes. It's actually the day after my 38th birthday, by the way, will be. And, well, I think there was also a eclipse like after the American Revolution that crisscrossed the nation. I don't know what your beliefs on astrology are, whether you believe it's for real, but the idea that America is in a civil war which may transform into some sort of an American Revolution, some people have said that that eclipse that will crisscross America in 2024 will see the fall of the Roman Empire of the modern era, that is the United States of America. And that is a very fitting title, Roman Empire of the modern era, considering America invades other countries more than any other country on planet Earth under the guise of freedom and democracy, but it's really just to further an evil agenda. So, do you have anything to say about this idea that by April 8th, 2024, we're going to like witness the next American Revolution culminating and concluding perhaps, and this country is going to be completely different from what we have it today?
You know, I would agree that there is a spiritual dimension. I'm not into astrology, but I will tell you my mother was the personal secretary to Gene Dixon, who conducted seances in the White House. And so, you know, when I talk of demons and the spiritual realm, I have some personal experience. And also as a evangelical Christian, you know, I believe that the Bible is very straightforward when it talks about, you know, like Christ was there at Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee, and he was very busy about not only healing people, but exorcising demons out of people. So there's a spiritual dimension. It's very real to me. And I believe that it's fueling much of the ongoing cultural revolution. And of course, it's using the insidiousness of Marxism as an ideology pushed around the world and especially in this country. And I think ultimately what we'll probably find, you know, clearly if you understand what President Xi Jinping has said in China and his recent speech, he's very hegemonic. He has every intention of using the mechanisms that are in place to become a world hegemon. And of course, Joe Biden and his ilk are pushing, using the Great Reset, the unfortunate circumstance with COVID-19 in a direction that I believe is very Marxist, and of course would neuter our country in a way that we would begin to surrender some of our sovereignty to the likes of a one world government, which is ultimately what the Great Reset is about and what President Xi and his allies would like to see.
Yes, now that great reset, it seems like if you're going to put an Emperor Palpatine at the front of that great reset, the Emperor Palpatine, it's not Joe Biden, it would be Klaus Schwab. Funny how Alex Jones of InfoWars, he did a episode, well, a Sunday episode where he like showed Klaus Schwab receiving like that Medal of Honor in that ceremony he was at, and he showed clips from the third Star Wars movie, the Revenge of the Sith movie, where Emperor Palpatine was announcing the start of the Galactic Empire, and he like shot back images of that and Klaus Schwab giving his speech after the medal, and it kind of creepily looked kind of similar. Now this idea that Great Reset is for some sort of one world government. Well, that's what the bad guys want. There's also the idea that when you think of reset, there may be some sort of, oh boy, currency reset. Yeah, I got a lot of people rolling their eyes here because we've been down this road before with this whole Nassar Jassar RV global currency reset thing, thinking that there's going to be the release of some sort of a gold-backed currency to solve all of our financial problems, and maybe a debt jubilee to get rid of the debt, which is unpayable. Interestingly, though, Donald Trump, oh, shouldn't say his name, that may get me censored some, but he did hang up a portrait of William McKinley in the White House shortly before the end of his first term. And it has been said that the reason he did that, William McKinley, he got us on the gold standard at the turn of the 19th going into the 20th century. And apparently that's one of the reasons the bankers wanted to kill him at the time. And but Trump was planning, some say, to put America on the gold standard in his second term, and that, if anything, is the primary reason why the cartel, the cult, the powers that be, the bankers, whoever, they wanted Joe Biden to make sure that he gets in office and committed all the voter fraud to make sure that that happened. So, and do you have anything to say about the idea of a reset, not necessarily being a one world government, could perhaps be talking about a currency reset of some sort that could happen and should have happened if the man who should be in office was in office? Anything about that you can offer?
Well, certainly, we know that the globalists have their ideas about changing currency. I wrote a book called The Deeper State, and I dealt with the likes of the Bilderbergs, which are really the movers and shakers, the big bankers, and a number of other so-called secret organizations. I just think that the Great Reset, whether it's, I don't attribute it all to Klaus Schwab, but clearly he has compatriots that see this as an opportunity. And I quote a number of those in Give Me Liberty, Not Marxism, and how what they seek is obviously power. But that's not any different than what Karl Marx said in Communist Manifesto, because ultimately and ideologically, he said time and again, their objective was one world government and all under the control of the elite, of which he considered himself among them. And the ideology is what is so insidious, and it has continued through the last 150 years to where we are today, and it still has its grips on places like the communist China, and certainly arguably continues to have a residual impact in the Russian Federation, Venezuela, Cuba, and elsewhere around the globe. When we're talking about power, it will take on many nuances. And the Great Reset, I just see as a mechanism, and it's not just COVID-19, and it has certainly to do with the transfer of wealth and whether or not we go to a different standard. Of course, the Chinese would like to see their currency trump the US dollar, which is quite possible, I think, in the next decade or so. So there are a host of issues here. They do collide with one another. I do see, what the Chinese are writing, what the likes of the Klaus Schwabs are writing, and of course here in our country we have a host of characters. You can say the puppet master behind Joe Biden are a host of deep-pocketed people that have their own agenda for the U.S. So It's not looking good at this point. We have to resurrect our liberties. We have to demonstrate our persistence in saving the direction of this country. But right now, give me liberty, not Marxism, is my cry. I hear that from the Cubans who are, tearing up and down the streets in Cuba in spite of the henchmen that are under the regime. Unfortunately, we're beginning to see the impact on our own civil liberties, and we need to be very conscious of that.
Yes, and I seem to recall in your interview with Greg Hunter, you were kind of not really so willing to be optimistic about the idea that the military would engage in some sort of a takeover to overthrow the dark hats, black hats in government to give Trump the possibility of possibly going back into office, and all the good politicians and the white hats being able to take control once and for all. Now, I don't know if maybe I should, what I said earlier about the astrological significance of that eclipse that's happening in 2024, signaling the end of the Roman Empire, the modern era, possibly being showing, no, maybe you're mistaken. There is going to be some sort of a takeover, but is there something about the military? Do you think they're too couch potato like and too apathetic to want to do a takeover, or are they too cowardly, or is there some other reason why you don't seem optimistic that such a military takeover can happen for the benefit of the country?
Well, I've been associated with the U.S. Army for over 50 years. I understand the culture better than most. I know many of the senior leaders of the armed forces today and over the last many years. The culture is such that, with a few exceptions, they are not going to usurp civilian control. Now, there might be circumstances in the future where civilian control really becomes marginalized, and that it's necessary for a temporary period for some sort of congressionally mandated requirement for the U.S. military to act differently. But we've put in place a host of laws to include one that keeps us from enforcing domestic law, except using the National Guard, which is under a different Title 32 type of provision. But for the conventional forces to act as martial agents or law enforcement inside, and to expect that you're going to have general officers that are going to command their troops to do something that has been institutionalized and really become part of the culture to go against the civilian control. I don't see that at this point. I'm aware of the criticism that General Milley has, and I share some of that criticism, especially when he was testifying about critical race theory and the like. But most people don't understand that if you go back to 1984 to Goldwater Nichols, that's when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs was established. All he is an advisor. He doesn't command his own desk, much less his secretary. Most Americans don't understand that. The real power in the military, of course, resides with the Secretary of Defense and with the geographical combatant commanders who have all the troops under them. And of course, a certain portion of those are left under the control of the chiefs of the services, Chief of Staff of the Army, CNO, the Navy, and so forth. So I don't see at this point, understanding the culture better than most, I don't see a transition, the use of our armed forces to come to the defense of what some people think is, and they may be right, a critical time in the history of our nation. We didn't even see it during the American Civil War, and I don't think we're going to see it near term. Now, things could change, but I don't see that on the near horizon.
Okay, but it seems like things are playing out to help for the better. Among other things, some sources talked about how DC during the time and it's been totally locked down, and nothing is it's really dark there, no activity there. And there was a time where a lot of buses were being shuttled into to DC. There are some insider sources claiming that all the child trafficking and all the children in that were being saved and being transported by those buses. A lot of word on the street that that's one thing that well, you can't destroy the evil control system all in one sitting. You got to do bit by bit, little by little. And the underground child trafficking ring seems to be one that they were really going after. And if I may turn back the clock for a moment, the idea that the system of domination and control would want to shut down the human race like it did during March and April of 2020 with lockdowns all over the world going on, that kind of wouldn't work out for them because they want to use humans as pawns and cogs in their control system. If the human race isn't active and doing things like working their 9 to 5 jobs and all that, the system can't flourish. So it does seem kind of counterintuitive that they would set up some sort of a lockdown on the global scale to try to keep humanity in line. Some sources, insider sources, have said that what was really going on then was that the lockdown idea was really thought up by the white hats who are trying to infiltrate the bad guys in government and corporations, and they set up that lockdown as a way of being able to try to take down all the evil bankers and evil forces. They figured that with humanity locked down and people being in their homes, it would be a lot easier for them to, the white hats, to take out the bad guys, or a large chunk of them. Now, they weren't able to clear out everything, obviously. If they did, then we'd be a lot freer now than we were then. But like I said, that was a big hotspot time period where things happened, and a lot of word that child trafficking rings and underground tunnel systems and all that shuttle the child trafficking rings are all being taken down, and they're not as operative as they were in the not too distant past when the dark hats had more control than the white hats. Do you think what I'm saying here is wishful thinking, or possibly there could be some truth to this, and it's only a matter of time before the white hats can start exponentially shutting down the bad guys to the point where we see freedom coming faster and faster and faster as we move into the future?
Yeah, I don't see things as nuanced as perhaps you suggest. We obviously have criminal syndicates involved. We have bad players inside government. We have bad players outside of government influencing what goes on inside. But I'm far more optimistic about the general population than I am about some of the power players here in Washington. I've written about them, I've seen them, I've known some of them over the years. Like I say, I've spent many decades here in Washington, and I've been all over Capitol Hill, in the White House many times, all over the Pentagon, elsewhere. So I'm not as conspiratorial, perhaps, as some would think from reading my books. I'm rather pragmatic. I understand power. I understand the coalescing of power amongst certain groups, and that's why I write about secret societies and how they manipulate political players. And I do see various levels of political espionage, political insurgencies, and so forth. But I don't know anything about child trafficking. I know a lot about because I was involved with the former drug czar, so I know illicit drugs and how that interfaces with some of the other bad actors in the world. In Washington does have a role, but I'm not going to step much beyond what I've just said.
Yes. Well, since you mentioned that, I guess I can talk a little bit about the phony war on drugs for a moment, because it's so many twists and turns and duplicity in that thing, where I mean, the idea that you want the war on drugs is fraud because the governments are the ones that ship them in. Michael Ruppert has a lot of things to say about the CIA shipping drugs into America, and the idea that the war in Afghanistan was really a cover-up to help the U.S. government cash in on the opium trade and all that. That's another thing. Um, but also, in regards to this, you could also make the argument that okay, well, technically the government has no authority to criminalize something just because it doesn't like it. Every human being, our rights are inherent at birth. As long as you do no harm and don't intend to cause harm through negligence or deliberate intent, you can be as reckless as you want with your life. But then again, there are really paranoid, concerned folks out there who will insist, I don't care. I want drugs to be illegal because society would be better off without them. Okay, I've seen what drug addiction can do to people. I lost someone to a close friend to heroin overdose several years ago, and I still think about her every single day. She may have had a drug problem, but she was a fun girl and all that. And well, overdoses seem to be happening all the time in America and have increased a lot since that war in Afghanistan. But then again, there's the idea that decriminalizing stuff is the way to go. Portugal seems to be the model for that. When Portugal tried to decriminalize everything, a lot of the paranoid drug haters were all like, "Are you out of your mind? This is going to cause drug addicts to terrorize society left and right to support their habits. And what do you think you're doing? You can't do this." Well, that is not what happened. Portugal apparently has had much less addiction and much less of drug crime ever since they did what they did, which raises the question, if it's going to work for them, can it work for everybody? How in the world are we supposed to solve this problem without infringing on people's rights to be as reckless as they want with their own lives, as long as they don't hurt others, but at the same time don't allow something that is sure to cause society to fall apart if everybody's doing it and everybody becomes addicted to it? Anything you got to say about that?
Well, what I hear is harm reduction, and I spent a lot of time in Switzerland when they were having their heroin giveaway programs. I made some, national programs over there, work with their campaign of citizens. I spent a lot of time in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and the like, and I talked to all the harm reduction people there. I've debated the George Soros's people that were pushing harm reduction and drug legalization. So I understand the issues. I'm not really sure how that directly relates to Marxism, but I have a great deal of experience because I've been a national advisor on these types of issues.
Thank you. By the way, I think at this point is the point. I'm going to have to start doing this regularly with radio shows. From this point, this interview onward, any part that people want to listen to is going to have to pay me on Patreon to listen to it. We've been talking for about 35 minutes or so, so let's maybe try to go for another 25 max. So, but the rest of this will be pay-per-view for listeners. So, now I think we can all agree that socialism and the extreme socialism of communism is going to fail as a system. But I ask the question, why is that? I mean, I had my late maternal grandparents who both died last year. My grandmother, she lived in Germany during the rule of Adolf Hitler, and she said, say what you want about Adolf Hitler and what he did to the Jews and all, from a standpoint of economics, he was actually a pretty decent politician. He actually found a way to make socialism work in a way that satisfied a lot of German people. I'm sure a lot of people that hear me say this are like, whoa, stop supporting Hitler, man. You don't know what you're talking about. But I have asserted many times on this show, and maybe someday this will be a quote attributed to me, that I've always said the reason capitalism always works better than socialism on planet Earth is because we live on a planet where money exists. If we lived on a planet where money did not exist and technology, like Nikola Tesla like technology, was not suppressed and could provide for everybody, and everybody could live in harmony to realize we don't need to work for money, we just need to work to love thy neighbor and be self-sufficient and all that, then we could live in a system with no money, and we could call it socialist, but that's okay because the fact that there is no money means that there's going to be no cartelism, which is crony capitalism to an extreme cartelism that could possibly destroy society. So, okay, maybe I'm raising your eyebrows too because you seem to be all anti-communist and all, but do you see where I'm going here? I'm trying to say I'm not talking about communism in the Joseph Stalin sense of the word. I'm talking about communism in the Jesus Christ sense of the word, where you give to the poor. If you have something that you don't need, you're willing to give it to the poor, and you're willing to exercise self-discipline to only live off your needs and work really hard to love thy neighbor and care for yourself and become self-sufficient. Do you see where I'm going? Do you think maybe this is what the earth needs to go to X amount of decades from now?
Well, the Marxist ideology calls for no private ownership of property, and that there's a common sharing of all property and all responsibility, and everybody contributes equally of effort to the common good. Unfortunately, it never works. I've spent time in the Soviet Union. I've certainly spent time on the Iron Curtain for years, on the demilitarized zone between South and North Korea. I've seen a host of things from my own stepmother who fled communist East Czechoslovakia. So I've seen this firsthand, and socialism is about, especially in this culture, it's about taking from one party and giving it to another, and yet the effort that is expended is not the same. I think democracy, or certainly capitalism, which has its roots in the Catholic Church in the 14th and 15th century when they owned a third of Europe, and they understood that all you have to do is provide an incentive, such as the Protestant ethic that came out of John Calvin in Geneva, Switzerland, and you combine the capitalistic view of the Roman Catholics with the Protestant work ethic, and those two ingredients came to fruition here in America, which made us a prosperous nation. So when our founders put together a document called the Declaration of Independence and had 29 grievances against the British Crown, they understood that if you give someone an opportunity and you don't overrule them or try to oppress them, then they're going to prosper. And I think those ingredients of capitalism, it's not a perfect system, as Winston Churchill said, but it's the best system that we have. And so I'm not a fan, obviously, of socialism, because I believe socialism ultimately becomes communism. And of course, that's just an ingredient all rooted in Marxism. And therefore, given the warts and problems associated with capitalism, I tend to be a capitalist, just because I think it's the best of the worst.
Yes, and of course, as long as there's a conspiracy to suppress technology that could easily provide for everybody, like Nikola Tesla's little box that could provide energy for everybody on a city block. Classic scene where I saw in a few, I think at least one Nikola Tesla program or movie where Tesla's trying to show his technology to a tycoon, and the tycoon with his feet up on his desk and a cigar in his mouth says, "Tesla, I'm not interested in your little box that can provide free energy to everybody in a city block. There's no profit in that." And that, in a nutshell, explains why the idea where we could live in a society where money doesn't exist and stuff is provided for everybody is possibly a long ways away, but I do hope it'll happen in my lifetime anyway. I still got a long ways to go on this earth, I'm sure.